I'm waiting till the last.
So you have a house there too?
Well, no. That's good. You guys are gonna have that.
No, I don't vote.
Hey Dave, what's happening?
There's 2 chairs right there. Doesn't work.
So you don't care.
He's got it in a Windows Media format that doesn't work.
We're flexible.
But the camera works.
Does the sound work?
We'll find out because you're being recorded.
Okay, we're late.
Yes, ma'am.
That's my teacher. Hi, welcome. Once again, you got that yourselves. We have lots of people here. It's great. I'm so happy. So I want to talk to you a little bit. Because, yeah, just a little bit. You hush up. Because this is our 6th history forum, and we think we had a little summit meeting, some of us, yesterday, to see how we thought we were doing. And we think we're on the right track, but and largely because you've been great. And so I wanted to kind of review what our purpose is that might make it better. But what delights me the most is to see so many familiar faces, people that are coming back month after month, and that's just great. I'm so pleased about that. Okay, first of all, I want to tell you what a forum is in case you forgot. I looked it up. Okay, I've got two definitions of forum, a little different from each other, but basically the same. A forum is a public discussion. It can refer to a meeting house, or any conversation that's available publicly. Okay? Second definition, a forum is a place, situation, or group where ideas and views on a particular subject can be exchanged, which is closer to us. And then there was a definition for history forum. Yay, that's us. It's a community for historians and history enthusiasts. So, when we started this, our idea was that we would get away from the speaker audience kind of thing and get as many of the people that come involved in the conversation. Because the whole purpose is to perpetuate our history, to learn about it, to tell what we know, even if it's a little piece, because it all adds up to our history, and to keep the stories going. And the stories are the greatest part, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so we thought that we would start this year with just kind of the basic, what we're all about. And how we got here was what we started in September. We've talked about the basic industries, the farming, what else have we talked about?
Oystering.
Pardon?
Oystering.
Oysters.
Oh, oysters. We talked about oysters. That was a big draw immediately.
Logging, fishing.
Today we're going to be talking about fishing
Willie
Yeah,
Hill.
Cranberries.
and cranberries and so agriculture. Agriculture we talked about. Okay, so and today it's going to be logging and all timber-related things, we hope, and whatever else you want to bring into it. And I want to tell you that next month we'll be fishing. Irene Martin will be among the people, and we hope we'll get some, some old, maybe retired, if we're fishermen, maybe they never retire, I don't know. But if they can spare us some time to tell us how it was when they started, what they know from their grandfathers, and how it was in the beginning, how it's changed. Then that'll be March. April, we talked about doing something about shipwrecks and life saving, because that's been a biggie in this county, and particularly in this part of the county. And in May, the beginnings of transportation, beginnings of roads, railroad, and as you know, one of the reasons that Pacific County is as wonderful as it is because it was hard to get here. And people didn't overrun us right away. It's taken a while. They're starting to, so beware. But anyway, and so we'll talk about that. And then we had talked about the idea of doing some kind of a artisan fair or whatever, and having a blacksmith and maybe some net knitting and various things. And we're kind of putting that idea on hold for a while. So May will probably be the last one for this year. We'll start again in September, possibly with the beginnings of settlement and various places in the county that settled early. Some of those settlements are still with us, some are not. And so that's kind of where we are. We also talked about how we get more of you talking, because a lot of you know stories that you're not telling us, and we don't want to hog it. And so the perfect thing happened this morning. Steve had a PowerPoint sunny, and so even if it was working, we couldn't see it.
I'm gonna do hand puppets.
So that'll give us more opportunity to hear some of your stories. And I think to make us feel a little bit more comfortable, I hope, we'll take about 5 minutes right now and go around, and would you just tell your name and where you're from? And then, as we proceed, we're going to start with Steve, and as we proceed, I hope you'll weigh in and say, what you know about whatever he's talking about.
You told me to fill up for 2 hours.
Oh, did not.
You know,
We do?
I'm full of it.
Yeah, you are. And we do have some expertise among us. So first, let's just say who we are.
I'm Steve Rogers, and I was born and raised in South Bend,
And you're still in South Bend.
and I live in South Bend now.
Okay.
I'm Rick Bales. I live in South Bend. And I'm wondering if I may, as far as on the topic, what about infamous fires
What about infamous fires
in Oysterville?
in Oysterville?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had some. Yeah, when we get to settlement, we'll talk about the unsettling parts of settlement.
How about that county seat?
How about that county seat? We're expecting you to bring it back anytime. Okay, Tucker.
Hey, I'm Tucker. If you want to call me, my phone number is right on the board there. I'm president of the community club here. And so we're sponsoring in our way, allowing this to happen in our building. We think this is a great outreach for us, and we're excited about it. The entire board is. Do we have any board members here? Just me, okay. Oh, yeah, they are right here too. Like, I think you joined up because
Of this.
Of this, yeah, okay, yeah. appreciate
Yeah.
that.
That's good.
The only thing we ask is when it's cool like this, when we have to turn the heat up, we ask for a donation to help us with the heat. And so there's a little can over there to give us a couple bucks or something, that'd be real helpful for us. When the weather gets warmer, we would just dispense with that. I said, well, we could leave it out, who knows? Maybe one of us will run for president. So that's all. I
Okay.
live right across the street.
Michael?
Michael Lemeshko, and I'm from Bothell, Washington.
Cindy Rinker, my husband used to volunteer at the museum. He's at automotive class right now. And we live in Ocean Park.
Bob Abel from 194th, and my grandma was born in South Bend.
I'm Kim Beasing, and my mom and dad moved to the peninsula about in '77, and that's my thing. And we now live in Port Arthur Dam in 194.
And started with Kite Museum.
My mom and dad started
Yeah.
the Titans. Yeah.
Colleen, I'm from, born and raised in Auburn, moved down here in 2012.
Vaughn Newcomb, I'm living in Long Beach, but I'm from Seattle originally.
I'm Frank Hilton. My father bought the Boudreaux Seeley's place in Ocean Park in 1944. It's west of the library, about 10 acres on the ocean. And Boudreaux was one of the preachers at the church here. He was sort of a preacher for recreation because he had a huge steel fortune.
I'm Alan Coogan, and I've been here since the 80s. I'm currently from Portland and Ocean Park. Because I moved with Frank to the beach house when the pandemic hit.
I'm David, and I live in Ocean Park, and my grandparents had a place in Ocean Park in the 40s and onward, and I've been coming here since as long as I can remember, and finally moved here a few years ago.
My name is Robert Taylor. I'm from El Waco. I come from the village of Quinapamille at Bruceport. And my white family came from land fraud called Pacific City, and ended up settling in the Bruceport Village. And I'm the librarian for the Chinook National Library in Milwaukee.
My name is Roy Knott. I grew up, or I was born in Raymond. I grew up in the woods outside of Menlo, in the Willapa Valley, and I now live in Aberdeen.
My name is Mary Knott. I grew up on Mercer Island and met him in college, and we've been together over 50 years. I just followed him wherever he went.
I'm Dave Williams, and my cousin Cindy and our great-grandfather founded the town, and we live in the Red House down here. I say I was raised in Oysterville because I spent every moment of my life down here except I go to school in Portland, and I live in Portland today. I used to run the bank, Shore Bank Pacific, when I was in Milwaukee.
I'm Rose Power. I grew up in New Zealand with a logging family down there, so I know logs. I've lived on the peninsula for 20 years, so I'm a newcomer, but I'm getting used to it.
Get used to it?
I'm Don Davis. We currently live in Woodland, but we purchased the property when you drive into the cemetery. We're on the east side, and it's our intent to get a house, start going up there, and relocate to the peninsula. So
I'm Malcolm McPhail, a cranberry farmer down at Black Lake, and we gave a little talk last month here. And anyway, that's we've been doing it for 42 years.
Ardell McPhail, originally from Cottage Grove, Oregon, and lived here since 1985. In a while.
I'm Carol Walksmith, also known as Pepper's wife, and I come from Portland and now we live right across the street.
I'm Terry Sangren. I'm a volunteer at Pacific County Museum, and I'm the one that sends you the time to renewal.
I'm Dave Steinbrin, resident of Raymond, most of my life. I came back there and became a teacher for 32 years, a board member of the Pacific County Museum, and a volunteer.
I'm Nick Gray, born and raised in CDU.
Lisa Glad, my mom's side of the family is from Ocean Park. Grandma had oyster beds out here, and I'm distantly related through marriage to Dave. I went to the Williams family reunion.
Yeah,
last time.
You coming this year?
Absolutely.
Good.
I thought you were familiar. Okay, so that's us.
No, we don't have to go.
Yes, us.
This row here.
All you guys? Yeah, I thought you were talking all the time. Okay.
I'm Dale Michael. I'm from Milwaukee, Oregon, and my wife and I moved to Ocean Park in August of this year.
Yay, one surprise.
My name is Sturgis Dorrance, and I live in Ocean Park. We've been coming here since the 1960s and built a house here 30 years ago. I'm originally from Seattle.
I'm Vicki Carter, and I'm from Longview. I was born and raised there, and we've been coming here for vacation since as long as I can remember. I didn't know there was anywhere else to go for vacation. And I still can't figure out why my parents never bought a cabin or something here.
I'm Jean Litzel, and I was brought here by my parents in 1947. And married a farmer who became a logger.
Yeah, you're in good company. On farmers and loggers, right?
Melinda Crowley, originally from Walla Walla. Been here 32 years. I guess that's it.
Not really it. Cranberry Museum and Linda are.
Right,
I'm married service agency.
A long time ago. But I married Lee Crowley, and that's what brought me here. And we were used to be cranberry growers. I am involved with the Cranberry Museum, not as much as I used to be, but. You're next.
I'm Jane Rose, married to Bob Rose, and we live on the Rose Ranch, and I was a South Bend girl all my life. I didn't get far, I married a boy 13 miles south of me.
I'm Bob Rose, and I was raised on the ranch. We celebrated 100 years this summer. When I wrote a book here, I don't know how to divide it up. I didn't know how many people. Maybe when we're done, we can draw names or something for people that want to put it in the hat.
Good for you.
Anyway,
That's great.
I just been my whole life there. Outside of 4 years in college, I've never been away from home.
I'm John Ducharme. Until I was 20, my family had a beach cabin in Ocean Park. That would be Ocean Park, Maine. I've been on the peninsula since '86 and have lived in Seaview, Nakata, Oysterville, and I'm currently in a little paradise in Oahu. I'm retired from a second career in the school system and have been a crotchety woodworker up until then.
Hi, I'm Linda LeClaire, and I guess my biggest claim to fame now is that I'm a Chinook Indian, and that I came here in 1948 as a baby, and when my grandparents lived here, aunt and uncle lived here, and we moved here I started high school, 1962. So, and I think I'm considered a local.
My name's Kathy Kurchenk, I live in Seaview right now. I was raised in northern Minnesota, and my claim to fame is that both my grandfathers were loggers who started in North Carolina and followed the forest to Maine, and then to Wisconsin, and then to Minnesota, where they ended up as carpenters and working in mills, starting in the 1880s.
Good.
I'm Debbie Halliburton, and I live in Ocean Park. I like history, same way that everybody here does. My mom's from Capilano, and she's one of 11 children, and almost every uncle was in logging, and my cousins and my grandfather. They weren't fishing, they were logging, and Sydney asked me to give anecdotes today, which we can do that later. But I did bring some of my collection of logging books, so if anybody wants to have a look, it's just fun. It's a fun thing to know about. It's what this whole place was built on, fishing and logging. I mean, that's why we're here. It's a tourist now, but before you had make a living, so that's how we all.
And the beat goes on.
Beat goes on, yeah.
Okay, so Steve, now it's your turn to regale and amuse us with your non-slideshow.
Well, I'm Steve Rogers, and I had this beautiful, I spent 3 hours yesterday sitting in an uncomfortable chair, working on my new computer to bring you 35 slides. Because the nice thing about being involved with the Historical Society is we have photos, great photos. And what I had planned was talk about extraction of lumber, and milling of lumber, and hauling of lumber, and all the things that are associated with it. So I'm going to try to make that happen orally. I'll do the best I can, and I promise I'm not going to talk very long. My family, I'm third generation, and I'm not joking when I say I'm the son of a logger. My dad was originally what was called a jippo logger, which was not a pejorative term at the time. It's a small contract logger. And he was indeed a small contract logger. World's worst businessman. He'd come home after logging and he'd go back And she ran the business till she was 90 years old. And I learned a lesson from Aunt Mary. There were two things about her. One, I'm adopted. George Rogers adopted me. And in fact, his name's on my birth certificate. I don't know how they did that, but he is Quinault. And part of the Armstrong family heritage at Shoalwater. So I'm sort of a native. They treat me like an elder, but and I've served on several committees with the tribe and have a positive relationship there too. But anyway, part of the land that Uncle Everett bought included Baby Island, Round Island, and I don't remember the native name for it, Toano, I think, Toano. So it ended up when my aunt died in early 2000s, she was 94, and my two brothers and I were the last people standing, and so we inherited the island. And it's a wonderful conversation piece, and I've kayaked out there several times, and it's a very spiritual place. You go on the other side, and it's very peaceful, and it's, I don't think it's a big secret. It used to be, we tried to keep it a secret, but it's a native burial ground, as islands were, if they could find one. But back in the 50s, University of Washington Department of Archaeology asked permission to dig, and Aunt Mary said no, which was, we're glad she did. So, and once in a while you see someone out there, someone's on your island, what are they doing? They're not staying. And as you know, a few years ago, this guy named Deanna Stock walked out there, tide came in, he drowned, and found his body at the mouth of Bear River, and there were footsteps leading from the mainland onto the island, off of the island, and that was it. Poor guy. So what I was going to present today is I was going to talk about the history of extraction. And we've all seen the size of the logs. Yesterday I went to Chehalis to watch some basketball, and we followed a log truck that had 6 logs on it, all from one tree. I mean, that's something, a real man, I was driving, would have taken a picture. With the logs, I mean, you just don't see them like that anymore. And it was quite a sight to behold. But you see these photos of these one-load logs, especially on the railroad cars. And we know the story of oxen hauling the trees out of the woods to begin with. And what was unique about Pacific County, and from here to Benton, practically, is how skillfully the waterways were used to move logs to the mills. And if you Greenhead Slough, you know where that is, where you're coming from South Bend, that straight stretch on the right, you'll see a bunch of piling, and that was the family dump, log dump, garbage dump. And I remember riding with my grandfather, because they were logging on Bear River Bridge, and was actually an alcoholic and was never sober. So in brothers and I didn't get involved. All three of us graduated from college, all three of us ended up being teachers. And I retired in 2000 as a high school principal. My last job was in Port Angeles. And my dad always said, I don't want you to have a gun, and I don't want you to have a chainsaw. Well, I don't have a gun, but I have 3 chainsaws. So these giant log rafts used to start, well, just on the other side of the, well, no, I'll back up. Where the big oyster pile is in South Bend, between Raymond and South Bend, right out there were log rafts. They went all the way up to what's called Eklund Park, which is kind of almost an island at that end of South Bend. And then once you go through what we call the Narrows and get close to what we call Rat Island, there would be logs rafting all the way there. And we lived there. We lived between Raymond and South Bend behind what was called the Canary Cottage. And we were kids, we'd go over and we'd roll logs. I don't know. You stop and think about it, we'd fallen in. See you later, or not see you later. You know, and these were serious logs. It was pretty stupid. Jump in, swim to the island. I mean, it was kind of cool. So, transporting the logs up North River, which is on the other side of the bay, and I have 2 beautiful slides. I think next time I'm going to come early and set up a slideshow and just let it run until we start. So people can get a
Yes,
sense
that's
of
good.
that. Hate to see it go to waste. It's my fault. I must have stored them on the stick wrong because it wasn't Mike's fault. So hard to believe. I'm the guy that goes to Olympia and I'm there to see a specialist on the wrong day. So, so transporting, before log trucks, they would, some of the streams, some of the Neva streams, North River, they would have what were called splash dams. And they would dam up part of the river, and they would let logs back up there for a fairly long period of time. Then they would blast the dam with dynamite, and the log would rush downstream, and there would be people downstream who would collect the logs. It was a pretty risky business, but it was a way to store and manage the logs in those days. And once logging trucks became more practical, I have a slide of old logging trucks that would carry only 1 log. But eventually, those 1 logs went away. And they became more reasonable size. They were still big, and they were still hard to manage. But the other thing that took place that I found very fascinating was the railroads. And they would build very elaborate trestles, particularly between Pacific and Lewis County. There was a town and a mill called Wallville. And it was a really interesting place because half the mill was in Pacific County, the other half was in Lewis County. And there's still a Wallville Road, and I've gone there and wandered around. I've not found anything. I've been told there's a cemetery there somewhere, but I don't know. I've never found it. But the railroads that they built, they would build these elaborate trestles up these valleys and gullies and log and then tear them down and build them somewhere else. And, I mean, and they, once in a while there's a picture of a locomotive falling over or some sort of an accident, but very rare. And I thought that was really interesting how they moved them any way they could before they went with the current method of transportation.
Steve, if I could just talk about that a little bit, I interrupt you, but
No.
lot of that was because they used steam shovels to build the grade for the railroad. And the steam shovel could only pick up dirt and drop it. It wasn't like a bulldozer that could mill the fill, so they had no choice. If they were gonna get to the other side of the stream, they had to drive by it. That was the only way they could put the railroad through.
Well, logging led to the development of the railroad, actually two railroad lines between Lewis County, Chehalis, Centralia, and Raymond South Bend. And we wrote a really cool, the first magazine that I got involved with Doug Allen, the author, was about the history of the railroad between South Bend, Raymond, and Centralia, Chehalis. And these little towns developed along the way. And every town had a school. They were isolated. They didn't have school buses. They didn't have transportation. But they had to have these towns so that the steam engine could stop and get water. But eventually, the ones on the Milwaukee Road just plain died out. It was north. But some of the ones like PL, Doty, Dryad, Francis, Labam, they are still there in one form or another. They're not towns, but there's still places on the road that are identified. But the other ones like Burt, Sutico, and some others that were north are just gone. And in those days, it was very, very labor intensive, very dangerous, and resulted in men would spend all week in the woods in a camp. In fact, I used to joke that I still joke, I'm always joking, that I used to sleep in the 42nd Street Cafe. Well, those of you who've been here a while remember when it was rains. And summers, my mom, my Aunt Mary, her daughters, and we little kids would come down, escape the rains for a week, and the guys would come in from the logging camp and spend the night with us. And that was quite an adventure. And I remember we used to love to make Chef Boyardee spaghetti. Oh, I would remember that. Yeah, it's food. So,
It's easy.
the
No restaurant.
South Bend across from what used to be Bendixon's, it was East Point, and now it is a place that's being developed by the Port of Local Harbor for some type of commercial development. There's a steam donkey in the park, and that made a real difference in how logs were extracted. And I have a slide of a spar tree. They would take the tallest and straightest tree, and someone with a lot of nerve would climb it and rig it to the point they could use the cable hooked to the donkey and to the trees that were in the gullies and were in the woods, and they could pull them back up to the landing and then load them on logs or load them on railroad logs in order to haul them to the mill. What's really interesting is a couple years ago, my brothers and I did a little bit of logging. I gave the name at 12 acres. And I was just stunned at how fast that stuff moved. They used an extractor, which is I have pictures, but it's hard to describe. But it looks, it's on tracks, and it has this head that will cut a tree, limb it, and cut it to the right length, and put it on the landing to be loaded onto a log truck. And they just went through that 12 acres, because it was flat ground. They just went through that 12 acres, and I think it was 2-3 days. I was really stunned. And so today's logging is not nearly as, they said, we we rarely use a chainsaw, they said. Sometimes when trimming, there was one little gully that they couldn't get in. Well, it wasn't really a gully because you can't lock gullies, but there was this indentation in the middle of everything. And, so, it's, and those babies will cost you $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to do. And, it's kind of sad, there's some places lately where you see them sitting in a yard, logging yard, and they've been there a long time. That means there's not any business going on. And it's a very cyclical business. I do apologize for not having a better show. But, my dad, when I graduated from high school and moved away, we got, in our house, we got heat. It was really nice. We had a wood stove. You can imagine what that was like. And my dad got a job at Weyerhaeuser. Ended up retiring as a woods foreman. And that made things a lot nicer for my folks. And but at one time he had a show up the Palix River. And there was a dock, which isn't there anymore, not too far from the highway. And he had a gill netter that on the side of it he wrote Palix Queen. And he would take his crew up. I went there a couple times. He barged all the equipment up there, and he took his crew up there every day. It was their crew bus. And that was how we got to work and how we got home. And it was, again, very labor intensive. I'm sure there are folks in here who have far more experiences than I just happen to be involved with the museum. And the nice thing about a museum is I have a key. And I can go in there and snoop around and look at our photos. And Dave and Terry are here, and I don't want to embarrass them, but they're my heroes. And Dave especially, I got involved with the museum probably 15 years ago, maybe longer, and it was a mess. It was just a mess. And Dave has created an environment there where, it sounds a little facetious, but we generally know what we have and where it is. And that's really handy in the museum. And Dave has done it single-handedly every Tuesday, like clockwork. And every Tuesday, Terry's there, taking care of memorials, taking care of membership, taking care of business. And we're really blessed to have those kind of folks. I have here copies of our Southwestern magazine. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to just take whatever you want out of here. These are extras. And I also have these. And if you live in Pacific County, you should belong to our museum. And we are the caretakers of Pacific County history. And we're very worried because there's no one behind us. I'm 77, and I'm one of the younger folks involved with the museum. And what's upside down?
Well, see, that's what happens when you get older.
I don't know how you know.
I do know. I think this is a good time to say that the annual meeting of the Pacific County Historical Society Museum is going to be here next month. We don't know which day yet, but everybody's invited, and
But we're not gonna buy everyone lunch from the Hilton Hotel.
no.
That was a grabber.
Yeah.
We hadn't had a meeting in years, so we thought we'd pull out all the stops.
This will be more like sandwiches and chips,
That's
but
right.
that's fine. And
Kegs of beer.
all
right.
Now
you're talking.
Yeah. Only if they have a membership, though. They have to buy a
That's
membership.
true.
No, but anyway, so
Yeah, this is,
stay tuned.
again, I apologize for not having.
It was better without the, you know, it was
you are still spending your career with Weyerhaeuser?
I do no longer work for Weyerhaeuser, but I work for Rainier and Weyerhaeuser, who both owned, obviously, timberlands in Civic County, and I still have a forest products company. But what I do today is I broker recycled paper to the Norpac mill in Longview, which used to be the Weyerhaeuser mill, and to Port Townsend Paper Company, and to the McKinley mill in Port Angeles. So no chips, recycled paper. That's the future of container board.
That's the old Ishawa mill, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
That's the old Ishawa mill?
Yep, it is. Ishawa, Nippon, Crown Zellerback, it had a number of ownerships. Mill in Port Angeles, but they were all Crown Zellerback years ago.
Yeah.
And of course, Crown Zellerback had a big presence in the county. So, anyway, I'm just an old timber guy. Know Dave, who was my banker at one point. Anyway, I worked for Rainier probably the longest, managed the logging operations in the north end of the Olympic Peninsula when it was big company logging operations. Ran a chemical cellulose plant for them in Florida and left them as a vice president in Connecticut. So I know a little bit about Rainier. Weyerhaeuser, I was a contract supervisor right out of college and handled contract loggers down in this area. So Bear River Ridge, know it very well. Grays River, know the areas very, very well.
You say Merrill Ring?
No Merrill Ring. Merrill Ring, I worked with Merrill Ring on the north end of the Olympic Peninsula, but not down here. So anyway, I'm just an old timber guy. Run sawmills, run pulp mills, run logging operations in the northwest and in the south. And like I said, I grew up in the Willapa Valley, and my step-grandfather and his step-grandfather had a logging camp at the mouth of North River and Smith Creek on the north side of Philadelphia. Yes, Tony Alexander. So, used to graft the logs and bring them into South Bend to Olympic Hardwood. So, anyway, I've done a lot of that kind of stuff in my past.
So, Roy, you wrote a kind of a history of logging in the area, kind of divided it in parts, and I'm hoping Steve.
Would you like me to just kind of touch the high point?
Well, I'd like you to talk about a little bit about the biggest change, the points at which the biggest changes in the logging industry here happened.
Okay, I broke, just trying to find some way to throw my arms around this, and I wrote this not necessarily for today, but I have copies. It's 24 pages, and it's not so much for this group, although you're welcome to it, and if you have an email address, I'd be happy to send it to you. But it's for my kids and for my grandkids. And my kids especially got drugged behind me through the corporate world. How many corporate moves did we have? 12? 12, maybe, something like that. But anyway, I wrote it for their benefit, but I'd be happy to kind of go through the eras. And I really identified 6 eras, and I'll see if I can remember them. The first was sort of pre-1900, and that was sort of the winding down of the native culture. And devastated by measles and smallpox. And the native culture was really focused upon one species, and one species only. That was Western red cedar, and it was for travel canoes, and it was for their lives. The next era that I identified was the 1900 to early 1930s time period, and that was really settlement and really pursuing Douglas fir. You had Weyerhaeuser that bought Great Northern's lands, 900,000 acres. There were a number of other acquisitions. Some were legal, some were illegal during that time period. There was just squatting on public lands and taking timber, but there were a lot of timber companies in the area, all basically pursuing Douglas fir for lumber, as Steve said, loading it out aboard sailing ships, or used for actually building locally during that time period. At the end of the 1930s, after the Depression, a lot lot of those small companies were in trouble. And they were bought up by 3 big companies. They were bought up by Weyerhaeuser, they were bought up by Rainier, and they were bought up by Crown Zellerbach. And you really had almost, I call them the big 3. And from 1930s to 1960s, was sort of the era of the big 3. And they all picked kind of a different niche. Weyerhaeuser, for most of that time period, focused upon Douglas fir, sawing Douglas fir. Rainier came along and built a mill in Grace Harbor, and they focused upon hemlock trees, which were really just waste at that point. Hemlock trees were being bypassed and pretty much just, if you look at the old logging photos, and perhaps Steve, we can see them on some of yours, it looks like a war scene because they tore those hemlock trees up. They really didn't want a lot to do with it.
They were skinny little things.
Yeah, exactly. They just weren't worth sawing in that era. Weyerhaeuser focused on Douglas fir and sawing. Rainier focused upon pulp and really dissolving pulp. When Rainier became a public corporation, it was originally, the company was formed by a former mill manager in Hoquiam, who owned some property up near Mount Rainier, and he called it Rainier. But when the company went public in the 30s, they were making the precursors to Rayon. So it became Rayonier, if you will. So they made dissolving pulp, and they made textiles. You got textiles in here today that are being made from something called viscose. It's made from wood pulp. And then the third company was Crown Zellerbach. And Crown Zellerbach went after those hemlock trees that really weren't wanted by anyone at that time. And by that point, sawdust and chips were, every mill had a big wigwam burner, you remember those? And they were red hot at night because they had to burn all these chips and all this sawdust. And if the sawdust wasn't dumped in the streets as it was in Raymond and Aberdeen for fill, it was burned. And Crown Zellerbach went after the hemlock logs for pulp, and they went after Douglas fir chips. They were the first ones to go after Douglas fir chips. So that's the next era, as I try to break this down. And the following era ended about 1965, and it included the Columbus Day storm. And the Columbus Day storm was, I'm sure you all remember, was devastating. Weyerhaeuser alone lost 3 billion board feet of logs out in the woods. And what ended up happening, it just happened to coincide with Japan coming back out of the war years. And housing starts went from 100,000 at the beginning of that era to 600,000 a year during that time period. And our logs, they were rushed because hemlock can't last very long. They were logged and roads were built, and a big portion of the remaining older timber made its way to Japan. And that initiative actually carried over all the way until the big trees were gone. And the Japanese were no longer interested in our timber. And today there's still some export, but it's for the Chinese. They're smaller diameter, they're for China, and it's for Korea. And it's much less valuable timber. The next era I lived through, and actually I was a vice president with Rainier at this time, so I got a chance to see it firsthand, was the 1980s, and it was the time of the financial raiders. And all 3 of those big corporations were public corporations going into the 80s, and all 3 of them were attacked in one way or another by financial investors. And probably the most famous one was Sir James Goldsmith, who bought up and parceled out Crown Zellerbach and went back and retired in France a billionaire. In fact, I brought the book along. One of the most interesting books about his behavior is a book entitled Billionaire, and how he dismantled that company. And because the export market was still developed and going strong, any notions of allowable cut were out the window. We're going to cut every species that can be sold, if we can put it on a ship and send it to Korea, especially Korea or especially Japan during that time period. It made its way out of the country. And the final era is the era we're in today, and that is that you now have TIMOs, timber management organizations, you have pension funds, you have environmental organizations like EcoTrust, you have a lot of different organizations, just a plethora of ownerships now that have replaced those big corporations that have been dismantled and sold off in pieces. And they're cutting those trees, the ones that don't have a conservation mandate. They're cutting those trees on a financial rotation, which is about 40 years. And it's the old, if you've studied economics, it's the old intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenue. They cut them right when they hit that age, and that's why you see all these little trees that are like this big around. And what that has done, back to Steve's point, is automation. Now you can automate and you can log like crazy with no people, virtually no people. And if you think there's no people in the logging, go to a brand new sawmill like the Sierra Pacific's mill in Shelton that's run. It makes 1 million more feet a day. It is run by 5 people.
Really?
So that's just a quick run through of the 50-some years and beyond that I worked in the wood products industry. Steve?
The small log mill in Raymond, Weyerhaeuser Mill.
Yep.
It cuts 8 to 18 inches.
Yep.
Is the size it cuts.
Yep.
It's a small log.
Yep.
And they're hauling out stuff.
Yep.
They're very busy.
That's a good example, but see, Weyerhaeuser is reaped. And the reason why Weyerhaeuser doesn't have more small log mills like that is, in the area, it employs a bunch of people, is the REIT can't have more, it's because it's publicly traded and there are requirements to become a real estate investment trust. You can't have more than 25% of your assets in manufacturing. It's gotta be in real estate, if you will, timberlands. And that's why Rainier ended up spinning off all their manufacturing operations.
What is your prognosis for supply in Mississippi County in the future?
I think supply is not the problem. Obviously, there's a lot less supply when you're cutting little trees that are 40 years old than there used to be when you had a big backlog of mature trees. The bigger issue is demand, and that is when you can grow eucalyptus in the southern hemisphere in 5.5 years, it's bigger than the trees we're growing here. And this business gets globalized. That's where all the virgin pulp paper industry is moving, is to that world. Because you grow a tree in 5.5 years that's that big around.
Well, I remember when people who worked at Weyerhaeuser here were going to Borneo. Back in the 60s.
I worked for Weyerhaeuser, and that was really not something to be proud of. I mean, they were good people, and some were my friends, but they devastated those Malaysian and Indonesian workers.
So I got a couple of questions.
Uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
So in Washington, you had those 3 guys buying up all the timber.
Yep.
In Oregon, they didn't.
Nope.
What was the difference legally? Or why was Oregon a small mill state as opposed to Washington?
It continues to this day because you now have Sierra Pacific, which owns timberlands and sawmills and is vertically integrated. Privately held. You've got Rosebrick Forest Products, privately held. You had Seneca until recently, privately held. And the biggest difference was the Oregon and California lands. Every other section was public timber that couldn't be cut. And those log trucks that you saw going down the road with 5 logs, that's the DNR. That's, if you look for red paint, you'll see that's why those trees are so big, or were so big and were allowed to grow so long, is because it's public timber. And the problem the public timber is having today is they're growing trees that don't fit the sawmills or fit the logging. So there's no new investment in mills, there's no new investment in logging those big diameter trees, because the bulk of the timberlands in Pacific County are privately held. like 90% of the timberlands are privately held. And private timberland owners that have a financial mandate are gonna cut those trees in 4 years. That's another good if I got. Excuse me.
I was curious, you skipped over the early 1900s when all spruce logs were logged here for World War I.
For World War I, absolutely. Proud Czarback, in my paper, I talk a little bit about it, how they sent wood, spruce to Gresham, Oregon to be sliced to make the PDY airplane. But of course you had the spruce division that was in the Raymond area.
On my ranch.
Yeah.
We got a big trail right behind the barns that goes clear to the bay.
Yeah, exactly. And the railroad that went out to Lake Crescent, you know, I told you I worked up with the earth and Lake Crescent. That was a period of time, and I can get into price controls. That could have been a different era. Back to your point, because the government ran.
Pretty short and pretty limited here on the.
But the government called the shots. It wasn't financiers called the shots. Because they even brought in soldiers to do this, right? To operate, because they couldn't get employees. That was also the labor movement had begun to materialize, et cetera. They couldn't get, so it was run as a military operation.
Well, there's an added piece to that, was all the ships, they came to realize that they used to use fir logs as the mast of the ship.
Yep.
You could use a spruce log and it was
Yep.
much lighter.
Yep.
So all the spruce logs and all the spars were made out of spruce.
Yep.
So I'm running a boatyard over in Taiwan, and we are buying spruce logs to make our masts and spars, all coming out of the state of Washington.
Wow.
And here we go down to the mill in Taiwan and pick it up.
Yeah. Awesome.
So that's still going on, they're looking for good spruce for that film.
Yes.
Is there any liability to the notion, economic liability to the notion of retaining forest as a carbon sink in an era of global change?
That's a really good point, and it will have an impact. I have taken a carbon price of $60 a ton, just as an example, and I put it into marginal cost, marginal revenue calculations for our timberlands. I went to 42 years, maybe 43. It's just that once you hit the commercial size and you apply the interest rates that these financiers have anymore, you can't afford to let it go anymore if you can liquidate it. But it will have, back to your point, it will have an impact on private land. And if it jumped to $100 or $150 a ton, it would have a much more substantial impact.
And that's, land trusts are doing that now,
Right, I know they are.
and buying their land and selling the carbon credits to others. That's
It's another
source
revenue
of
source,
revenue.
It's very interesting.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No.
Those are the eras, the 6 eras. If anybody like, I brought a few hard copies of this. A lot more in depth, and I can certainly send you an on. Give me your email, I'll send you a copy. Yep.
When you were talking about spruce as well, my interest in history, a lot of it's just like the human side of a lot of this, and then what logging meant to families and people. And as far as spruce goes, it saved Cap-Lamont during the Depression because they built a box factory, and that gave employment to 120 people. That if you weren't in the woods working, the women were working at the box factory, and they sold those to craft cheese. They made cheese boxes, and a lot of the other things that used to come in boxes, and it was such a boom to the town. They're sitting there with nothing, and you might be able to fish and feed your family, and you might be able to sell some logs, but having that box factory come in allowed people to actually make some money, and they were so thrilled, and it was, we think hard work, hot work. My mom had red marks on her hands the day she died from the shook, the little boards. They had to get them coming out of the steamer, and they get them lined up, cut. And it
something that they were so proud to be a part of that. I mean, we just don't have a concept, you know, this is what happens when we get corporate, we get huge, we get big. They took away all that source of investment by the community in their job. They had a newspaper, they talked about, they had a softball team. I mean, you know, these were people that really felt like this was part of their town. This was their life. And I think it's just fascinating to me to see that change.
Mary and I lived in Vaughn, Oregon, which was a Long Bell community that had a sawmill, a plywood mill, a logging operation. I was on the volunteer fire department. We lived in a company house. If we had a problem, we called the company carpenter or plumber. It was really a tight-knit community. And in fact, when I left IP, Gilchrist, of course.
The coolest town on earth.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, Gilchrist, Oregon is south of Bend.
Yeah.
Company town, owned by a lumber company. Bowling alley, high school, library.
Yep.
And that's what they, you know, they set it up. There's the light, there's the bowling alley. But they set this place up in the middle of nowhere just to have the town and the mills. And these are some of the houses. I mean, these people weren't living in shanties and shacks. I mean, these were beautiful homes. And that was all part of the, you know, that was part of the deal up there. If you went, and they built a shopping center that looks like it was made in 1980. This is built in 1930. I mean, grocery store, everything. These people still get together and have a reunion, but there's no town. I mean, there's bump in the road.
The sad thing about the Longville town that we lived in right after we got to college was Longbell had a sustainable cut philosophy.
Yeah.
And that's what went
Yeah.
completely out the door beginning in the 1980s. As soon as the financial deregulation went in and institutional investors could begin investing in buying up the stock,
Gone.
it was gone.
Yeah, that whole lifestyle is gone.
This is a question. We're in I think, we're in a real, kind of like you spoke to Eric, about shipping boxes, because there are so many businesses that are mail order. I mean, just take Amazon, the number of boxes they consume. Is this beginning to, or is this already in the?
This is what I do, okay? I deal with Trader Joe's. If you go to Trader Joe's, every box that Trader Joe discards, I buy. And I send it to paper mills. And let me try to put a positive spin on this. One of the reasons is I've gotten in the timber industry, I've tried to find more socially responsible places to work. That cardboard box, if it's properly cared for, can be recycled 20 times. 20 times.
That reused, recycled.
Recycled, brought back to a bowl, right? To make pulp out of it, to make container board out of it, and it takes far, far less timber. In fact, if there's a problem in Western Washington right now in the timber industry, you can't get rid of chips, wood chips. Sawmills can't get rid of wood chips. You can't get rid of pulpwood. Loggers are leaving pulpwood in the woods because West Rock just shut down their mill in Tacoma, and Cosmo is shut down. There's 2.5 million tons a year of consumption that's gone away, and the mainstream pulp industry just drops and drops and drops, but not recycle. Recycle is doing extremely well.
That condition was true back in the 70s, the same thing. And so all the mills up in Darrington were looking for some way of getting rid of their chips. And Seattle was looking to do pyrolizing their garbage.
Oh, yeah.
So we took the pyrolizing process and then talked to the timber guys about doing it with all their chips and using that to generate electricity. But then the market came back, which put that deal out of business. My guess is you could do it today and it's not gonna get put out of business.
Well, I'm trying. I'll just tell you something I'm doing right now. I'm working with Clallam County and Jefferson County and we are working on bringing in an Oregon strand board plant. And there's a really good chance we can do that. I just took a group to Mississippi to tour an OSB plant, talk with people, and we're in the process of trying to put together the business case to take the people like Norbord and Toco and Weyerhaeuser and others to say you need to locate an Oregon strand board plant. And when you talk about employment, that's roughly a $400 million investment for a new plant. It's 150 really good jobs, which would probably create 300-400 total jobs. And it fits really well to a place like Forks that's near the Straits where you can actually do barging. It could conceivably fit well in a place like Raven. But there's going to be something to fill that void.
So what happens, you got various folks like Eco Trust, Columbia Land Trust and the like, who are trying to grow big trees. And Eco Trust at one point,
Carbon, that's your only chance.
well, they had this mill down in Eugene that they had purchased with the idea of cutting big timber because the quality of the wood has changed so dramatically bad that they were trying to get better lumber.
That's true, Dave, but the problem is engineered wood products, laminated veneer lumber, cross-laminated timber, man-made timbers, big pieces of wood, etc., substitutes that are lower cost and higher performance because they're more highly engineered, they're destroying that market on the other end. And really the bigger dilemma is what do you do with the Washington State DNR? They're still managing these trust lands according to their legal requirements of 1889.
Right.
When 3 million acres were given by the government to the state. And the reality is they're growing trees that are losing commercial value.
Well, the same thing's going on in Oregon, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Well, it's a
whole
little
deal.
bit better Oregon because you have people like Ferris that build a mill depending upon public timber, and that public timber continues to provide laminated veneer lumber, and they're even making a new product called mass plywood. I'm not gonna dig in the weeds, but they're finding new niches to take advantage of that kind of.
Okay, can we,
That's
leave
right.
the big guys, the corporate world a little bit, and get back to little guys? Sorry, Bob, but I wanna talk about your little timber operation that's going at the Bruce Ranch.
Well, I'll get up to say people. Our ranch turned 100 years this year. And Dad came there. And I wrote a book and I dropped 4 more copies. We could draw names afterwards or something, I just give them away. Anyway, my dad grew up in Peel. And he was born in this country and his dad was a machinist or blacksmith. Anyway, his brothers were all butchers. And he bought cattle through high school on horseback, chased them home for his brothers to butcher, and they supplied these logging camps, Wallville and Riderwood and that with meat. And 21, him and 2 brothers decided to buy his uncle out in Raymond, bought the butcher shop in Raymond. And in 23, we connected to the beach here, the Moorheads came and wanted to sell him some cattle. Now, it's 56 miles, and he comes down here in a little old Model T Ford and 1 helper, and buys 8 head of cattle and chases them home. Swimming across the Nasil River.
Were they skeletons by the time? Were they skeletons by the time they got here back?
I don't know about that. They weren't very good cattle in those days anyway. Anyway, he got to the ranch, and it was getting dark, and he wanted to get to Raymond. And he figured he was gonna lose them in the woods if they went through that old South Bend highway, so he saw some lights down on the other end of the ranch, and went down there, and the caretaker was taking care of it. The cattle had been moved off, and fall before in September. And the white clover was about that high, ready to peel, it grows about that high, you know. He never seen pasture like that. And the guy told him, well, you better go see the banker because they repossessed the ranch. The guy went broke and sold the cattle. Now, how they got all the cattle off, or the new cattle on, I don't know. I never did enough about that. But you know, we was doing everything on horseback in those days and no trucks. But anyway, he went to town and Fred Eichner happened to be going to Portland the next day and he got the ranch lease for Dad and him and the three brothers. That's what started the Rose Ranch in July of 1923. And at the time he bought the ranch, they were still logging some of the spruce. That's why I'm familiar with it. The guy ahead of him had sold it and they still had a little time to log. He said they were still logging. Well, he didn't do anything then until after the war. Hemlock got to be worth a little bit of money and he sold the whole shebang to Olympic Hardwood, and they didn't log it till the 50s, and so then it was never planted back or anything, and not managed, and I was a cattleman and didn't have time to worry about the trees, and so it was clear in the 70s before I ever logged anything that they hadn't logged, and got a little money out of the timber to keep the cattle business afloat. we got out of college, my wife we were married a year in college, come home, 58, cattle market, we sold our calves for 16 to 18 cents a pound, so you can see, I didn't draw much money, we survived, and my dad died in 68, or January of 69, he was 68 years old, and I had to buy the ranch. We got the kids together and said, if you'll work on the ranch, well, we'll provide your college education. And we did.
Wow.
So, anyway, they've all graduated from college and they're retired now and I'm still working. Not really. I got the best of all worlds.
Overseas.
I do what I want to every day. I love the ranch and I love to get out and work on it. And this winter has not been good for me. I had COVID and then I got really sick in January and couldn't come down here for our January meeting, but I'm finally recovering. It's taken a long time, but it's been a real blow. So now we're logging. We're working through the ranch. We're logging about every 10 acres every year and planting it back. And the grandsons, I got my boys running the ranch now, and he's got 3 boys. And they're thinning and taking care of the timber as far as the hard work. And I just kind of line up the loggers and oversee what goes on. But that's going to be a good supplement to the cattle on the ranch. We got a little over 400 acres of timber. Well, it's quite a investment too, and quite an income producer now. But of course, the market's not worth nothing now. But anyway, it'll come back. So, Cindy, that's about all I got to say.
Well,
That's a lot.
Hey, Bob, now I know that you've added on to the ranch. You bought different parcels.
Yeah, we did, me and the wife, we was lucky.
What you started,
About 70, we started buying some ground that just came available. We
Yeah.
weren't looking for it, but they wanted to sell it. And, you know, at 500 an acre, you couldn't turn it down. So, you know, I told my son, well, we're poor again, we bought another. But, yeah.
how big are you now?
We're about 1,500 acres.
Yeah. And you're in like 4 different locations, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. The one by South Bend Dad bought before I got out of college. And then he gifted it to me and Janie, so I didn't have to buy that one. And the rest is, Nema place he bought in 70 and
Frank Hilton. I have had a good run as a young lawyer in the 1970s to start representing a couple of loggers that had a little sawmill in Brookings, Oregon, on South Coast Lumber Co. And
Still there.
it's still there and much bigger. Over the years, I've seen what you have seen develop with this one company. It's still a family business. One reason it has grown and been successful is they don't have to respond to investors. The family owns it and they don't pay themselves any dividends to speak of. So they went from a little lumber mill to buying the plywood mill, then doing a whole log chipping facility for Crown Simpson in Arcata that could do 500 bone-dry units of softwoods in 8 hours, or 250 hardwood. We built it at a fixed cost and agreed to operate it for 5 years. That contract made me famous. And then eventually they were one of the first companies to do laminated veneer lumber.
Yep. Still do?
Yeah, they were one of the first. They were just very, and then they bought more timberland. The Agnew family, they bought their timberland for $72 million in about 1990. I remember my client Ron Fowler called Agnew into his office and he says, I can run you into the ground, so do you want to sell to me or do you want me to run you into the ground? But it has been a great adventure, and it's forest products. Sometimes it's not just big investors, but it's family businesses that can survive and be successful.
That's a good example.
You mentioned plywood. Is there still timber around that you can make
Yeah.
plywood out of?
Yes, they own 100,000 acres. Agnew was about 72,000. And then they have federal lands, so they can still do plywood, laminated veneer lumber.
You still have a lot of public land down there, that's
Yes.
still ONC land, so, and they're still cutting those big trees in the public land.
And there's still mills around to process
Well,
it.
there's the best example, South Coast
Because
Lumber.
Garibaldi's long gone. I mean,
Oh,
all
well,
the-
there's an alder mill there, I think, now.
Yeah, so all the mills that were
yeah, it's-
capable of processing the timber
Well,
went out
and it's-
because they couldn't get the big trees anymore. to
Well,
make
it was
plywood.
private land around there, that area was private land, it got cut down.
Yeah.
And as you said, the lumber mill
Or
went from
Astoria.
50 employees to 8, with 25% more production
Yeah.
out of their employees. But still, they have about 500 employees because they're doing lots of other stuff.
I've done business with them, and they're a really good company, really good.
Where is this? I missed it.
Brookings, Oregon.
Yeah, almost to the California border of the coast. And they make some of the highest valued overlay plywoods.
I was down there last week.
They did-
I was there last week, I remember.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They did concrete form for the
Yep.
Panama Canal
Yep.
expansion and for the new tower that replaced the World Trade Center.
Medium density and high density overlay plywood. Yeah.
Did you want to say something, Jane? Oh, okay.
So I hear all of this, and you guys are all suits.
Yes, we want to hear your story.
My husband was a logger. My husband got up at 3:30 in the morning, drove from me like 60, 80 miles in the morning to get to the logging. And he worked out in the woods as a choker setter. This is where your wood comes from, you guys. In the old days, he was in 1960, I think he started. Worked for 23 years in the woods. And he worked himself up from choker setter to rig and slinger to hook tender. All that's out in the woods, slogging through the brush, and setting the choker. The whistle guy would beep and the log would go up onto the landing and they'd set another choker and do it again. He ate his cold lunch by the fire and went back to work. Came home muddy, never have done anything else. Could not even imagine working inside. And he was also a farmer, so he'd come home and milk the cow. And he took care of the farm, we have animals. He split cedar shakes for fences. He is an amazing man. And I'm so proud to have him for a husband.
I bet you did a lot too.
We worked together.
You did the house, the yard, the cooking.
Kids.
Because he wasn't there.
We had 5 kids and they're all grown up, right?
They all learn a work ethic too, don't they?
Right. They built the roads for just amazing to me. That's the hard part of logging, all this sitting in an office with numbers. Isn't logging. Okay, I've said my piece.
I had a question for you about where your husband was. Like, when I grew up in northern Minnesota, they couldn't log in winter, so everybody came in. But was he logging
He was here.
all year?
He worked for Jippo. Jerry DeBry was his last employer. He worked for Ruben Pendla out of Nassau. And so they worked year round, except when it snowed. And so we did get snow days. One year it snowed so hard that he didn't work for 3 weeks. Yeah. And remember that year?
60.
Yeah.
Oh, 60.
Yeah, it was in the
60
60s.
something.
It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill drove the crummy for the crew, so he had the crummy and he went in the ditch right in front of our house.
Oh.
Yeah. So there was Cy Robinson and Kurt Gray and quite a few from the beach, and then a bunch of guys from Nassau that were all part of the crew. And when Ruben Pendla sold out, he sold to Jerry DeBry, and Jerry DeBry's still working out of Capilano now.
And they're all in here. And this tells the story of logging in Pacific County. And a lot of it is centered on Nassau, Grays River, that whole area. And your husband's probably in here. Have you looked at this? Yeah. It's really a good book. And that's Brian Pentela.
There's a vinyl record, and I don't know if any of you know about it. It came out in the, maybe late 60s. It's called Where There Walks a Logger, There Walks a Man.
Buzz.
Yeah.
Buzz Martin.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh my God, that was such a good
Yeah. He sounds like Johnny Cash. He's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
He's the singing logger.
Yeah.
And he was on TV, and he actually had quite a few, Buzz Martin.
The best part was Whistle Pump Pete.
Yeah.
Whistle Pump Pete, he was a small man, and so he was working in the woods, and his goal was to be a hook tender. Well, a hook tender's the boss, and he would never gonna get it, and so Whistle Pump Pete finally got married, and he married a fairly heavy-set woman that wore a girdle. So she asked him to help her with her girdle, and he says, "I'm a hook tender actor." It was such so many good people worked in the woods, and Bill was there when Ron Smith got killed by a log that came down the hill. He got front teeth knocked out by a choker. He broke his ankle. When he broke his ankle, that's when we started the picture attic.
Oh, yeah.
Because he started darkroom up in the
think about that, most of us grew up in a period where setting chokers was part of the program.
Yep.
And I remember when I was 4, when we were running, I thought it was the HR guy for a large mill in Toledo, which was, was a GP, well, before it was GP, but it was still Johnson. And we would go to the hospital nearly every day to see some guy who, had his leg lashed or lost a leg, setting chokers. And it was really before they got into, you were talking about the high lead logging, where you got a spar tree and a cable on it. Before they had the high lead, they were just dragging it across the ground. And you can imagine how a log would hang up in that circumstance as opposed to being one end of it being pulled up and then being pulled up the landing. And I ended up.
Which way it's gonna go?
Pardon me?
Don't know which way it's gonna go either.
Right, you have no idea. It's another log loose and then, it's coming down. But I spent 1 year setting chokers. It was a place where you need to be pretty quick on your feet.
Makes a desk job look pretty good.
Yeah, well, a lot of reasons for you not to be doing these things.
Well, when I was doing some research on doctoring in early Pacific County, one of the biggest pleas for hospitalization was loggers and their accidents. Because they just couldn't deal with them doctors couldn't deal with them at home or in their offices. They needed more.
I actually looked up that in that era, 1900 to 1930, the odds of being killed in a logging accident in the Pacific Northwest were worse than the odds of being killed as a soldier in World War II.
My grandpa was killed in the woods. He lost a leg, and before they got him out, they were living in Oakville, so I'm not sure how far he was they were logging away from Oakville. But anyway, he got gangrene, and they got him to Elma, to the hospital in Elma, but he died, so, yeah, and that was 1932, maybe, or something, yeah.
So.
My grandpa, yeah.
My great-grandpa burst his appendix in the late 1800s in South Bend. He was in a logging camp.
Oh,
You know where to go?
yeah.
Oh,
I have a question maybe it's be a different talk, but, those old forests, they were there for thousands of years, they developed an ecological system. And now, all over the state, they're redeveloping, and I'm just wondering what the difference is when we walk through the woods, what the difference is in the ecology between what we're walking through now and what we would have been walking through 300 years ago. It's, different plants, different animals, not just the size of the trees.
Night and day.
Yeah.
I've suggested facetiously, I went to Oregon State as an undergraduate, forest engineering. I've said they should combine with the agriculture school. Because the only thing that's different are the unused applications of food, because it's genetics, it's pesticides, it's herbicides, it's whatever it takes to make that tree grow as quickly as it could possibly grow, because that's all holding costs for the investor. And you gotta cut it down.
Just one member of the community.
Can we talk, just a teeny bit, I had hoped that Frank Glenn IV would be here to talk about his donation or his sale probably to Columbia Land Trust of 300 and some acres of virgin forest here on the peninsula. But Steve says that he has a similar situation, right? And I want to know, what's the Conservancy or Columbia Land Trust going to do with that property? And is there a chance of saving a little bit of what was there long ago?
Well, at least you didn't ask me what I did with the money.
What did you do with the money?
mixed use, mixed. It wasn't just a tree farm, it was quite a few species, different species mingled in, and they kept that. They actually logged a little bit of it, sometimes just stuff that needs to be logged. And so we just sort of observed that from afar.
But is there any chance of, is there anything out there that approximates what, is being talked about that can be saved? Through, or is all?
Well, a significant number,
gone?
a significant amount of it is saved and put in trust. And, but they, you know, I think, and there may be other stories that I'm not familiar with, my own experience is very limited, and I was pleased with the way they handled it, the way they eliminated quite a few roads, which is good, because there were a lot of drainage issues as a result of the roads. And,
There may be a higher concern, at least from my point of view, and that is the REITs all have a mandate to make their quarterly earnings to their shareholders, if you will. And the way they're doing that a lot now is what they call higher and better use. And they're turning it into real estate. All the timber companies have real estate farms, and they're actively promoting conversion of timberlands into real estate. And it's happening on a large scale,
So is there any chance that what Bob is asking about, you know, those old growth, walking through the woods of old growth is still possible, or?
well, the old growth's mostly gone on private land.
But will there be a resurgence of that 300 years from now? I don't know.
The answer's gotta be yes, because a lot of the land that is being acquired through DNR and other deals, so all the land trust property, they can harvest on until it reaches some level of, needs to be sustained, and then they can't do anything with it. And so that's gonna sit there, and they currently have 15,000 acres, Columbia Land Trust, there's 15,000 acres of land that ultimately will be set aside.
It'll certainly be better, managed better than it was by a team.
Yeah, but
more responsibly.
It will end up being, you go up into the national park on the Olympics, and the distance between trees is huge. The undergrowth is very different. If you're asking the ecological questions, it's a very different place than a managed forest, right? And you can walk through the forest, as opposed to trying to walk through the forest here, where you get about 6 feet and you're done, right? But they're gonna end up with that in patches here and there. And the question is, can you do it in larger segments than that? And they're working on one at 72,000 acres.
Well, it's not very big, but you've got the Don Bonkers old growth, where you can walk through that on Long Island.
Right.
Yeah, you're
Right.
back in time.
Exactly.
what's the name of the preserved old growth that's up there on the back of the Bear River Bridge?
Pardon me?
Is that the Teal Slough Grove?
No, it's, I can't remember the name of it, but it's pretty significant old growth preservation there, and the land that we sold backs up to it.
Do that. And was that the other piece that Nature Conservancy had?
Yeah,
Right.
but it's,
Now, the problem with Nature Conservancy is they bought the land and then they kicked everybody off for hunting purposes and sort of other things. So the question is, how do you maintain that land for the local folks to be able to use it for their other purposes?
one of the things that I found very frustrating, and you could give you some help on this, is bird piles. It just seems like we did a very small logging show, and we ended up with 80 bird piles. And you can burn them, but who wants to? But there's a chip source. And there are loggers, there's a fellow in
Graves Harbor Paper Company, when the Quiggs owned it. Actually, the Quiggs had heavy-duty trailers, and they actually brought slash in and they chipped it at the paper mill. But, you know, uncoated free sheet market went in the tank, and there went Graves Harbor Paper Company, and there went the cogeneration of electricity out of that material as well.
I read a really interesting article, and this is not a whole new topic, but that some forestry places are starting to experiment with trees that grow farther south because of climate change. And is anything like that happening around this area? Sequoia and the ones that, the redwoods were the two species they were talking about, and they grow fast, I guess.
Well, I planted redwood on the Waterfall Valley when I was a kid, and they're big trees.
Yeah.
The problem is that ice broke them. The tops are broken. I mean, they're still growing, they're huge trees. Coastal redwoods, but they're ice damaged, really badly ice damaged.
Yeah.
They're
So
not acclimated.
it would have to be much warmer for them to be able to make it on the coast.
I think a bigger concern is kind of like what happened with mountain pine beetle, devastated the interior of British Columbia and the Rocky Mountains. And that is, as it warmed up, the larvae no longer died in the freezing weather, and they just devastated those forests. And I think there's a potential, especially when you have these big monocultures, there's a potential for something like that to happen.
Well, that's, you know, BC, that whole valley that's full of lodgepole pine that is all now dead.
All mountain pine beetle. Yeah. And it's all the way down through the Rocky Mountains in the United States. Mountain pine beetle, all those areas that warmed up, the larvae no longer died.
Right.
They've been devastated. And that's why British Columbia as a timber industry is shutting down. They cut all the trees. They were all dead. In the interior of DC.
Another question. What do you think is the future of that enormous expanse of land that I described as between 101 and 5 from, you know, 8 south? I mean, there is an enormous area of land in there. Is that all DNR land? Who owns that land? What will happen to that?
I'm not sure exactly. Give me a town or a local.
You mean from Daysell to I-5 and from?
Yeah, and 101.
And from
It has to be millions of acres.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Lakes and.
Yeah, a lot of that's owned by, insurance companies. You know, it's the Hancock property on.
The institutional investors, as I said, there is just a potpourri of ownerships of all different types.
It has to be millions and millions of acres.
Yeah, and the one private company that's buying up timberland wherever they can is Sierra Pacific. And they really own the sawmilling industry in western Washington now. They've got obviously the Shelton Mill, which is a humongous brand new mill. They have a mill up in Burlington. They have the mill in Centralia. They have the mill in Aberdeen. And now they bought Seneca, a sawmill down in Eugene, and they're expanding it to world class. It's going to be a huge, huge facility.
Well, they're in Northern California too.
Well, that's where they began, with all their sawmills.
Family Hill.
Red Emerson, yeah. Privately held. So when all the, you know, the financial world changes, it doesn't affect them. They just keep plowing, and they have been plowing it.
I had a relative who was a forester over in Germany.
Oh, yeah.
And I asked him about forest practices and what it was all about, and what's the point of the forest over here? And what do you think? I mean, they grow oaks, and they look like they're like a Douglas fir, because they grow them really close together. They come in every 10 years and thin, so they get a tree that's that wide and straight, and they can use them for rolling for plywood. I was expecting them to give me an answer about something about that. Water. The reason they have forests is for water quality. Do we take that into account? He said that's the major reason over there. Also, the Germans love to walk in the woods, and they don't have the brush we have over there. It's a little bit different.
They manage the heck out of their forests. I work for a German company. They manage the heck out of their forests. They really do. But they do it all, you'll have park benches and trails through commercial forests, privately owned commercial forests. It's, and a big, big part of it. If you pull out that marginal cost, marginal revenue curve, it doesn't work. It's just their mindset, and it's, especially on public land, is that they wanna grow trees closer to their true capability, not the first time they become merchantable.
But do we take that water, I mean, water is becoming a big issue, are we thinking about that too? Or do we just have so much we don't have to?
Well, in the south, I've managed the timberlands for many years in the south, it is an issue because a lot of that's aquifer, and a lot of the aquifers have been drawn down. It's an issue in some of those areas, timber-wise. You know, a number of books have been shown, and no one's brought this up. This historical fiction, this is Deep River, right over back there. This is a fantastic book.
It is.
For anybody that hasn't read it,
That's a great one.
it is a fantastic book.
And the author is fantastic. Go on YouTube and search the author's name, Karl Marlantes. There's several interviews of him. And his first book, Matterhorn, about Vietnam War is absolutely
That's a tough book.
fantastic.
It's a hard one to read, isn't it?
Tough book.
When were you to our
annual meeting?
He was at the.
I'm sorry?
We had to bring Carl to our annual meeting.
Oh, would that ever be something?
We did this
We
year.
did.
You did?
Yeah.
He's a member of the Historical Society.
You're kidding me! I'd have been here.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
Wow.
I got to share the podium with him.
We have pictures, I have pictures of Cynthia and Carl.
You're
Yes.
kidding me. Well, he's my hero. This is a phenomenal
I-
book.
He has a new book out.
Is that right?
It came out.
What's his book called?
And you know, the next, what is the next one? I should know that, but he, the next one is also about Vietnam, like Matterhorn was, but, wait,
Like go to war.
one of the characters in Deep River is the hero, who's a child in Deep River, is in this next one.
I can get
Yeah.
the title.
And, yeah, are you gonna look for the title? Yeah, it's good, it's gonna be great.
I think I get it
What do you think's gonna happen with the Swiss needle cat?
Jennifer, I
We
mean,
went to Hemlock.
Again?
why not?
Father and our ranch
It's
was
hot.
back, hot ground.
You know, I'm not an expert in Swiss needle cast. I've seen it bad.
And I haven't seen it the last 4 or 5 years, but it was bad here about 5 years
Yeah,
ago.
I can explain that, you know, when it impacts, but I'm not.
Sydney,
Yeah.
it's called Cold
Yeah,
Victory.
we're back planting.
Cold
Is it out?
Victory.
It's scary at times.
Although we don't want all one people in.
Is it out?
It's
Is it out now?
Yeah, it is.
It's scary.
Market is going down the tank and nobody wants to cut it again.
I think Hemlock's got potential.
No,
I really do. But anyway,
Cold,
we hope.
Cold Victory. Cold Victory is
Cold
the
Victory.
It's out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is amazing. You had him here.
Well,
Yes. You buy it in the Historical Society bookstore.
Yeah. We talked about him writing in the Seaside Cat.
well, and you know, the world gets smaller and smaller, okay. Tucker's high school English teacher in Portland, Carolyn Miller, is my age now, and she has a blog and a TV kind of interview series called Just Read It. And after meeting Karl Marlantes, and he's from Oregon, he lives in Oregon, and Carolyn is in Portland, I wrote Carolyn, I've been on her show, and I wrote and I said, you really ought to read this deeper, and you ought to look into Karl. And so he was on a series, I think, of interviews with her. And I just read something the other day. She feels, and Carol's had some mighty heavy-duty people. She feels Karl Marlantes is our greatest living writer
Well,
right now. And so I thought,
And he's a member.
yay,
And he's a member.
and he's a member. So sure, I think you ought to try to get him again.
Ray, I have one more question for you. One word, alder.
Alder?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, we can look at it any way you want. It fixes you wanna talk ecologically, it fixes nitrogen, it does a lot of good. Alder does, it's a wetland indicator, if you're cutting it, you gotta be careful. You're probably getting pretty close to some salmon streams.
There are actually some alder tree farms outside of Randy.
Yeah, they cut those down, Steve, just
No,
recently.
they're still-
Warehouse, you talking about?
I don't know who, but there's big stand, drive right through it.
It's worth a lot of money, and you have mills like the mill up in Port Angeles, you've got Cascade Hardwoods down in Centralia. I mean, there are a number of mills that cut it for furniture stock, et cetera. And it's valuable, but, you know, it depends upon what are you trying to do with the tree.
You know, if anyone's a little bit peckish, I do have some cookies here.
Thank you, everybody, for all your contributions and.
We've got Southwestern, so back in 1960.
Pacific County History Forum.
And you can all see yourself on film if you go to the Pacific County History Forum site on YouTube.